simultaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom and YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided by the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. And we are providing the public with a means. We're providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during this meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email. Alan, can you tell them the email, please?
So the email is remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us. Again, that is remote senate, which is REMOTESENATE @leg.state.nh.us.
Or call the number, Alan, please.
603-271-3043. Again, that's 603-271-3043. And just one more time for you guys, 603-271-3043.
Thank you. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are, so the town you're in, and if anyone else is in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Rosemary, will you please call the attendance?
Mr. Ayotte.
Please unmute,
Yes,
please unmute
yes,
yourself, everyone.
Mr. Ayotte is here. I am remote. I apologize, but should be able to stay engaged the entire time. Thanks.
Okay. Is anyone with you, Mr. Ayotte?
No.
Okay. All right. Mr. Bandazian.
Yes, I am physically in Manchester at the moment in a room with no one else.
Okay. Representative Bohm.
Boom, thank you. Here in Litchfield by myself. And
Okay,
hi, Kathy, you spelled your name wrong.
Senator Chandley.
Good morning. This is Shannon Chandley. I am at home in Amherst and I am alone.
Ms. Costello. I believe she's absent. Okay. Dr. Bush.
Morning, everyone. Happy to join you. I'm home in Plymouth, New Hampshire, and currently alone, although I do have a 2-year-old who might make an appearance, but currently alone.
Okay. Ms. DeVries.
Hey, I'm at my home in Merrimack. I'm also alone. I also have a 2-year-old that may pop in at any moment.
Okay. Senator Deach.
I'm here in Peterborough alone.
Okay. Ms. Fortley.
Hi, I'm alone in Litchfield.
Ms. Harrington.
Hi, I am presently in Westerly, Rhode Island, and I am alone.
Okay. Ms. Mesmer.
I am Mindy Mesmer. I am in Rye, New Hampshire, and I have a teenager who is unlikely to wake up before we're done with this meeting.
Representative Murphy.
Good morning, everyone. I am home in Merrimack and with watching my grandchildren, but alone in the room. Hopefully we'll stay that way.
Okay. Representative Nodder. I don't believe I've seen her join. Okay. Ms. Parity.
Good morning. I am in a remote portion of my home in Bedford with a household full of people, but I've isolated and banned them to the other part of the house.
Okay. Representative Thomas.
Good morning. I'm in Merrimack. I'm in a room by myself.
Representative Woods.
Yes, I'm Gary Woods. I'm in Bow, New Hampshire, and I'm in my study by myself.
Okay. Mr. Wimsatt.
Yes, good morning. I'm here in Concord, at my home in a room alone.
Okay. And I'm the clerk, Rosemary Rung. I'm home alone in Moultonborough, New Hampshire at our second home. Is there anyone that I didn't call? Okay, back to you, Senator Deach.
Great. I do want to note to everyone that there are links to the documents that we will be talking about this morning in the chat window. If you look below at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little blurb called chat, and you can click on that to see the links. Okay, we will proceed. I am going to share my screen briefly, and then we will move on to the presenters. Okay, so I will first share, looking for my presentation, which it's not showing. Okay, we'll just share my desktop. Oh, that's good. It's disappeared. There we go. Excuse me for the slowness. All right, now I should be able to share it. Okay. All right, are you able to see my screen now? The agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, okay. So we are past the introduction. So we are next going to review and approve minutes from our previous meeting. Did everyone get a copy of the minutes? And I'm open to hearing an acceptance or changes in the minutes. Do I have a motion to accept?
Christine, so moving.
Okay.
And I will second.
Thank you. Could you say your names, please, for Rosemary?
I got them.
Okay, good. All right. Any comments on the minutes? Okay. Rosemary, do you want to run through the roll call then?
Yes. Just say yes if you approve the minutes as moved and seconded, and say no if you do not approve them, or you can abstain. Mr. Ayotte.
Yes, approve.
Mr. Bandazian.
Yes.
Representative Bohm.
Yes.
Senator Chandley.
Yes.
Ms. Costello is absent. Dr. Bush.
I'll abstain since I was not at the last meeting.
Ms. DeVries.
Yes.
Senator Deitch.
Yes.
Ms. Fordley.
So just to confirm, the minutes that were sent were March, so that's not the last meeting because we did, or that's the last, never mind. I will vote yes, they're fine.
Yes, the March meeting minutes are the latest. That was the last time we've met.
For the full meeting. There was a subcommittee after.
Ms. Harrington.
Yes.
Ms. Mesmer.
Yes.
Representative Murphy.
Yes.
Representative Notter is absent. Ms. Paradis.
Yes.
The clerk votes abstains. I was not there. Representative Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Woods.
Yes.
Mr. Wimsatt.
Abstain.
Okay. The motion passes.
Thank you very much. So next we will move to the primary reason for this meeting, which is that we've had a request from Saint-Gobain to delay the RTO installation, which we'd like to discuss. And also NHDS has issued a letter based on the report by Golder, the environmental engineering report on Saint-Gobain. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Wimsatt, and we would like to welcome you to the committee, and I will stop my sharing and let you share your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning, Madam Chair. So we have two presentations this morning. The first one is from Kathy Beam at who works in our Air Resources Division, and she's going to speak to the issue of the permit for the regenerative thermal oxidizer and the appeal and variance request that you just made mention of. And then following that, Jeff Martz from our Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau and the principal author of that letter that you referenced regarding the Golder report will give a brief introduction to kind of just get everybody on the same place with respect to what's gone on at the facility by way of a site investigation and remedial action planning. And then, of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So Kathy is here with.
What I would like to suggest, if I might, Mr. Wimsatt, is that we have Kathy speak and then hear from our representative from the town of Merrimack, talking about their perception of what's going on, and then have questions relating to that, and then proceed to the letter, if that's okay.
Of course, absolutely. So with that, Kathy is here with us as a panelist, and she can share her presentation, and I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Okay, can you see my presentation? Yes. Okay, I'll move over here so I can see it as well. So thank you very much for the invitation today to speak with you regarding these issues. As you know, my name is Kathy Beam, and I've been working with the Air Division for quite a while, but for the past 4 years on the St. Cobain project. I've been asked to talk a little bit about both the town of Merrimack's appeal of the permit, as well as the variance petition that St. Cobain submitted to the department. And I just wanted to state that since both are in process of review, I can't really get into a lot of the technical or merits of the case, but I can talk about what the requests are for and the potential schedule going forward, just to give you some understanding of where we're at this time. So with that, I wanted to give a little bit of a background of where the air permit, what the status is of the air permit itself, and just put everybody on the same page. As you're aware, back in September of 2018, the governor signed into law state statute RSA 125C10E, which required control equipment installed on devices that cause or contribute to groundwater or surface water standards violations. That same month, the department sent a letter to St. Cobain requesting an application and a back analysis within 6 months, because we determined that they were subject to that state statute. I won't go through the whole process, but the final outcome was the issuance of a final permit back in February of this year, February 11th, 2020. And both the state statute and the permit itself require completion of construction and installation of what we determined was the best available control technology. In this case, it's a regenerative thermal oxidizer, which essentially combusts the emissions from the facility to convert them theoretically to CO2 and water. In the case of PFAS in the exhaust, it will also convert it to hydrogen fluoride, which is an important point to note going forward with the discussion today. And because both the state statute and the permit requires this equipment to be installed by February 11th of 2021, that's an important date as well. So that's where we were as of probably the last time that I came to speak with you. Since then, the town of Merrimack submitted an appeal because the permit was a final decision by the department. That appeal goes to what's called our Air Resources Council. So they have specific rules about how an appeal is heard at the council and what specific actions have to be taken in the steps to hear the appeal. I have a link at the bottom of this slide to where you can find all of the documentation related to the appeal. It's on our DES website under our legal units appeals section. And I've included the docket number if you're interested in following along with us as time goes forward. But essentially, the town of Merrimack is seeking relief from the council on 4 issues related to the final air permit. And per the appeal, those issues are prohibiting the uncontrolled PFC emissions, and I will refer to it as PFCs because that's what the state statute refers to it as. I think we're all pretty familiar with it being a more encompassing PFAS as the term now, but at the time of the legislation, it was PFCs. They also are requesting a return of the PFC emission limitations that were in the draft permit. They want the final permits emission limits to be replaced by those that were proposed in the draft permit. They're requesting that the council require an enhanced control device optimization program for the RTO. And then they're also requesting that the installation of a hydrogen fluoride scrubber be part of this permit. So those are the 4 issues that are going to be heard at the council regarding this appeal. So the town of Merrimack submitted the appeal March 10th, which was within the 30 days after the finalization of the permit. And back in April, the appeal was submitted to the Air Resources Council, assigned a docket number. And at the council's May 11th meeting, they accepted the appeal and assigned David Conley to be the attorney or the hearing officer for the appeal. So since that time, we've had a pre-hearing conference that Attorney Conley scheduled between himself and the attorneys for the town of Merrimack, St. Gobain, and then our Department of Justice and DES staff. At that pre-hearing conference, they set the hearing date for the appeal for December 14th for the council's December meeting. And then they discussed a schedule for motions, objections, submittal of witnesses and exhibit lists. I don't believe that those schedules were finalized. The attorneys are still talking about that. Again, at the bottom of the page is where not a link, but a way to find out the Air Resources Council's procedural rules, because that goes into detail about what all these pre-hearing conferences are and what all these steps need to be taken in order to get to the point of the hearing in December. So that is the status of the town of Merrimack appeal. With regards to St. Gobain's request for a variance petition, they submitted this request to the department. A variance petition is covered under a certain part of the state statutes, and it authorizes the department to issue a variance under certain conditions. So the petition was submitted to us, and St. Gobain is requesting that the deadline for installation of the RTO, which is currently in the permit as February 11th, 2021, per the state statute, that the deadline for that to be extended. And they cite both the town of Merrimack's appeal as well as COVID-19 pandemic as underlying reasons for this request. So the request that they have in the variance petition is either to extend the deadline to February 11th, 2022, or 1 year from the date of the final non-appealable order disposing of the town of Merrimack's appeal, whichever is earlier. And all of the correspondence related to the variance petition can be found on our one-stop page, but the link to the actual variance for ease of finding it is up on our blog, and that's where a lot of the information on the public hearing and all that will be. So I have that link as well. So they submitted this petition on June 4th, and per the regulations, we published a public notice on June 19th, sorry, announcing both the fact that we're taking comments on the petition, as well as announcing a virtual public hearing, which will take place on August 5th. As Senator Deach mentioned, we requested additional information from St. Gobain in a letter dated July 9th, which I'll go over in a moment. And that's due back to us with information by July 24th. And then we should have information about this virtual public hearing on our PFAS blog on around July 27th, as it's our first virtual public hearing for this type of situation. We're still working out all the details of how that will take place, but we should have that all worked out by July 27th and up on the blog. And again, all of the correspondence back and forth is up on our one-stop page, and here's the facility ID and application number if you're trying to find it. So variances are covered under New Hampshire statute 125C for air pollution control, and specifically subpart 16. And then we have administrative rules, procedural rules under 200. So that's where it talks about what has to be submitted in a variance request and how we go about public noticing it and such. I wanted to point out 20207, which is related to the decision, because this is specific to what the department shall base its decision on. And it says that within 15 working days after the public hearing, the department shall issue both the written decision and the findings of the basis of what that decision was based on. So the department shall grant a variance if the department determines these four things. In this case, the petitioner is Saint-Gobain. So have they taken reasonable steps to eliminate or prevent air pollution? Would granting the variance not create a danger to public health, welfare, or safety? Is the source of air pollution, does it have social and economic value to the area in which it is located? And if enforcement of the requirement for which the variance is sought, in this case, if we enforced the deadline of installation by February of 2021, would that produce serious economic hardship on the petitioner without equal or greater benefit to the public? So those are the four pillars of the decision. So unlike the town of Merrimack's appeal, which went to the council, as I said, the variance comes to the department to make the ultimate decision. When we requested additional information in the letter about a week ago, we did so under the Administrative Procedures Act, which allows us to request additional information as necessary. So I've tried to highlight what the four issues are that we've asked for information. The first is under one of the monthly monitoring plan updates, the Saint-Gobain facility stated that they had chosen an RTO vendor. And so we requested that they reach out to that vendor and provide a schedule for installation and operation of the RTO, just based on the schedule of the vendor's capabilities, just independent of all these other issues. And then they also mentioned that they had made modifications to date, but had remaining work needed, and that there was, some work going on right now. So we asked for what those modifications were, who the contractors were that were involved, in an updated schedule for those modifications. These are not necessarily strictly related to the RTO. These are related to improvements on towers or piping or electrical. So peripheral type modifications. They also stated that COVID-19 was one of the reasons for a potential delay in the installation of this equipment. So we asked that they provide documentation from the vendors and subcontractors who have informed Saint-Gobain of this potential. And then one of the requirements in the permit is that they submit documentation of, the RTO, including schematics, design, and detailed description. And since they've picked a vendor, we've requested that that information be more robust and be submitted to us. And again, this is all on our one-stop page as well. So that pretty much covers the highlights. So I can open it up to questions.
So I would just ask perhaps if anyone from Merrimack would like to speak at this point, or if anyone has questions for Ms. Beam.
May I? I'm not sure how we'd get.
Please. Yeah. If you want to raise your hand, what you do is you hit the participants button, and at the bottom of the list of participants, you'll see a little tab that says raise hand, but you can also just wave.
Thank you very much. First of all, is this PowerPoint going to be sent to us or made available? My question to Kathy.
Yes, I understand that's the case. I'm going to be forwarding it on to the commission. So.
Excellent, thank you. And I do have a little presentation to do, but I'll wait until any questions are asked of Kathy.
Okay, does anyone else have questions?
Just a comment, Senator Deach. I'll make sure to get the presentations on our website.
Great. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, terrific. Oh, Mindy. Ms. Mesmer.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, but can I ask where we stand? I'm sure Jeffrey Martz will cover this, but part of it it kind of is linked to this variance request from Saint-Gobain. Who is assessing, so they reference that the economic hardship needs to, if it exceeds the benefits to public health, et cetera. Who's assessing the potential benefit to public health to assess whether or not the economic hardship on Saint-Gobain is less than or greater than the public health benefit? I mean, I know that they, and as far as I know, the sampling program, which was implemented upon the state's science-based PFAS, MCLs, and ambient groundwater quality standards being issued, has been stopped by Saint-Gobain. I'd like to have an update on whether or not that has been continuing to be assessed yet, or has it been re-implemented, that sampling program? And that is in part, how we assess the benefit to public health. And so I'd like to know how this will be viewed on the part of the
Okay,
DES.
well, that item is third on the agenda for NHDES, I believe, to talk about the update. But perhaps Kathy or whoever's in charge could talk a little bit about the process of gathering information about the health impacts versus the economic benefit, which seems to me to be a very difficult trade-off to assess.
So in terms of the variance, that's one of the 4 pillars that has to be part of the decision. I don't think I can really speak to the water sampling and the health part of that at this point.
Well, not the actual data. We're not asking you to reveal that, but more how the process is done. How do you go about collecting? Do you go to HHS and ask for data? How do you collect the data in a general way, not relating to this specific case?
Well, certainly since we're in the public comment period, if there is information that the public wants to provide on the health impacts or that section of the decision, we would be open to any information that people want to provide. I don't have a specific answer for how we go about doing that. To be honest with you, this is the first variance request since probably 1992. So it's not exactly a routine part of the statute that AIR is involved with, but we'd be happy to take any comments on how we should go about that as part of the comment period.
Okay, so we would encourage the public then to provide comments on both sides of this question. Okay. All right, shall we move on to?
Oh, excuse me, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So
please state your name for it. Well, Rosemarie, can you get them all without?
Representative Thomas. So we're starting to see some, and this is a question regarding the presentation. We're starting to see some articles about the impact of chronic PFAS exposure on the susceptibility of people getting COVID. And so I'm wondering how the balance, because Saint-Gobain is saying that COVID is affecting operations, and the town, which is contaminated with PFAS, certainly has an impact from COVID as well. How do you balance those two considerations?
This is Mike Wimstad. I want to just, and Kathy's free to answer that, but I want to emphasize that we're in the middle of an administrative process here where a party has requested a variance, and there's a very specific process for the way that will be heard, presented to the public. We'll take public comment on it, and then the Air Resource Division of the department will render a decision. We have to necessarily be a little bit circumspect here. For us to be opining on exactly how that decision is going to be made before it's been made is not really fair to the public or to the applicants. So I just we want to be as open and share as much information as we can here, but we also don't want to say or do anything that is going to sort of contaminate the process in a way that would make any decision that the department makes subject to appeal or to legal criticism. So I just want to emphasize that we are in the middle of this process, so we have to be a little bit circumspect.
So again, I think Representative Thomas, what Ms. Beam has said is that any information that we have regarding COVID impacts of PFAS should be given as part of the comments and provided. Okay. If there are no other questions for Ms. Beam, then we'll ask Mr. Martz to continue with the presentation about the Golden report.
May I?
Who
I believe we're going to have Town of Merrimack status of appeal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm prepared. That's why I'm pushing.
Yes. No, I'm
First
sorry.
of all,
I got out of order. So you go ahead and present, Ms. Harrington.
Thank you. First of all, Kathy, thank you. I had a whole bunch of dates written down, but you've already done that, Pat, so I don't have to repeat it. So that cuts it down quite a bit. As far as I know, however, you didn't know the dates. My understanding is that by August 28th, the town is required to submit all the witnesses and exhibits. And by September 25th, the town must submit rebuttal on the evidence or information that St. Cobain has submitted. So those are two dates that you had not presented. So unless I misunderstood, those are the dates that I was provided.
I was going to say that was probably communication between lawyers that I wasn't sure if it had been finalized. So
perhaps, yep, exactly. Because exactly, we just heard about the hearing being set August 5th as well. That's fairly new, but you did present that.
Excuse me, Ms. Harrington. That brings up a question. Ms. Beam, did you not say that a decision on the delay had to be made 15 days after the hearing, which would be before August 28th? Or did I mishear?
Right. So we're mixing the two different projects. The August 5th hearing is for the variance.
It's
and according
extensive.
to the rule, it's the decision has to come down within 15 days. That's what the rule says at this point. What Ms. Harrington is speaking of is some of the actions related to the town of Merrimack's appeal, which isn't going to be heard till December.
Thank you for that clarification, because there are really two issues. One is our appeal related to the RTO. The other is the extension. And the August 5th is the hearing about the extension. Correct, Kathy?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so in terms of the RTO, the regenerative oxidizer, no, you know what I'm saying, the RTO. Our major complaint in the appeal is primarily, my understanding, based upon our request of the addition of a scrubber onto the RTO. And the rationale for that is our great concern regarding the very dangerous hydrogen fluoride emissions. It is also under understanding that the RTO will already be able to accommodate the scrubber. So it's not going to change the criteria of the RTO significantly in terms of price. The price would be for the installation of the scrubber. There's also some debate about calculations having to do with the temperature of the burn. And that has to do with the efficiency related to destroying or the destruction of the emissions. So we've spent significant amount of money on this. We've gotten consultants. We've paid between $15,000 and $20,000 on consultants for this, as well as a sewer issue, which I'll talk about later. That does not include the $22,000 we've spent so far on legal fees. But St. Cobain has much deeper pockets than we do, but we're just trying to be able to present valid information and accurate information. That's what's important to us. Okay, so that has to do with the RTO and the basis on our appeal, okay? The extension is a different issue, and yes, we will have testimony for the August 5th meeting. And it's interesting that, and the reason I asked the request for the PowerPoint that you had is that one of the criteria you have is to not create a danger to public health. Well, I really just want to highlight that if this extension is permitted, this brings the due date for the RTO to 2022. We've been contaminated for 6 years, if that is asked. That means that contamination is still occurring. It was first identified in 2016. If the extension is provided, that means we have contaminated an additional year, which is a total of 6 years. Now, half of our water supply has been closed down by DES accurately. 2 of the 4 wells have been closed, and yet the contamination is still occurring. To us, there is no justification for the extension. They've had a significant amount of time to be able to provide all the data. Apparently, it's voluminous. Would that be accurate? The information they provided is voluminous, and we've had to provide voluminous responses. God bless you to have to read all that stuff. But anyway, so we are obviously against the extension, and based upon your own criteria, it will
Okay.
create.
Well, of course, this is not the hearing, and the hearing will
understand,
come,
but
and
I'm expressing
and-
the opinion of the town of Merrimack. That's it. Now, the other thing, so that takes care of my RTO. I do want to ask Senator, and I had spoken to Rosemary before, we are also dealing with, and it can be done now or later, but I think it's significant somehow to report that Merrimack and St. Cobain are in a legal battle, literally Superior Court, over sewerage permits. Now, I can do that as a very quick report now or do it later in the meeting. I'm not sure what your pleasure.
Well, that sounds like it's probably more related to what Mr. Martz is going to be talking about. So perhaps we'll let him speak, and then you can bring up any relevant details afterwards. Does that make sense?
That's fine with me as long as I have an opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the best I can.
Right. So does anyone have any questions relating to the RTO? Ms. Mesmer.
Yes, Ms. Harrington, in the previous presentation, item number 2 regarding the air permit, return PFC emission limitations contained in the final permit to those in the proposed draft. Can you walk us through what that is about, that item?
I can't. I'm sorry. I'd be happy to get that information and forward it to the best of my, but I do not have knowledge about that specifics. That was
Perhaps-
not part of
Perhaps
the
Ms. Bean
information.
can answer that question. What's the difference between the final and the proposed?
Oh, Ms. Beam, can you tell us what is involved in the change between the original and the final, the draft and the final?
Well, without getting into too much detail, I can say that the draft permit had 4 PFAS compounds listed, 2 of which were remanded by the court between the time that the draft permit and the final permit was issued. And so therefore, when the final permit was issued, there were only 2 limits in there as opposed to the all 4 because of that. And then the methodology for calculating those emission limitations changed, and that's documented in our findings of fact, which is a public document related to the final permit.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Ms. Mesmer, yeah, okay, you're done. All right, so I would like to next ask Mr. Martz to present his presentation, please.
Thank you, Senator Deach, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today. Mike Wimsat is going to be sharing his screen, and I'm going to speak to the slide presentation I put together. I was unable to present that from my computer. So Mike, can you bring up the slides at this point?
I will. Hold on just a moment. I've got Kathy's here.
So just to, I guess I can kind of get started. And my intention with this presentation is to give you a high-level overview of the site investigation and kind of get into some of the concepts of the site investigation and also to provide kind of a familiar context in terms of the site geography and a little bit about the hydrogeology, so all of the committee members can be familiar. I'm sure some of the members of the committee have already seen the slides that I'm about to show, but I think it'll be a good rehash for everybody to be on the same page as we go into the question and answer period. I might run a little longer than the 10 to 15 minutes because my last slide, I think, speaks to Committee Woman Mesmer's question. So I'll try and answer her question as we get to the end there.
You're seeing that, Jeff, at this point?
Yeah, I'm seeing the first slide. It also has kind of the next slide as a preview. I don't know if you can switch to slideshow.
Yeah, I'm not
Go
sure.
to display settings, Mike, and then swap presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that.
You want to just go to slideshow and start slides. You're in presenter view.
So Mike, right at the top, display settings.
That's not what I'm, oh, okay.
And then swap.
Hold on. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's doing
I think if that's not working, we could probably go ahead and get started.
At the very least, I'll get it the other way. I'm not sure, Jeff, why it won't do that. I'm trying to put it in slideshow, but it's not doing it.
Well, I think it was fine. We could just go and look at it in edit view, if nothing else.
Right. Better than nothing.
Yeah.
I guess we could go ahead and click to the second slide, Mike.
Yeah. Are you seeing that second slide, Jeff?
Yeah, that's up. So thank you for that. So I'm sure by now the committee is very familiar with the air release pathway, but to kind of remind everybody what we're investigating in this aspect of the site investigation is we're looking at how PFAS has been emitted from the facility smokestacks. It's been transported with the wind and deposited as either dry deposition, either close to the site in high concentrations or quite distant from the site. And as it's been deposited on the ground through precipitation, leaching through the soil, the PFAS has migrated down through the soil to the water table, where in some cases it discharges to surface water bodies, depending on the hydrologic conditions, or in other cases, it has been drawn into water supply wells. Next slide, Mike. So Saint-Gobain consultants, Golder Associates, they've done the most recent site investigation work. They have compiled a list of 25 potential release areas, or they refer to them as PRAs for short in the report. And these 25 potential release areas are based on a review they've done of the site history. So to briefly recap the site history, this facility was originally constructed by General Electric or for General Electric to manufacture turbines for power generation. I believe it was for the Seabrook nuclear plant. So there are some unique characteristics of the building that were specific to that design, such as underground utility corridors to shuttle water to test the turbines. The building has steel plates in place due to the heavy nature. So, there activities by GE are part of the investigation, such as looking at volatile organic compounds, for example. So then in 1984, the building was purchased by the ChemFab Corporation, who performed similar coating operations to Saint-Gobain. So they began doing fabric coating with PFAS chemicals starting in about the mid-1980s. That company was subsequently purchased by Saint-Gobain, who continued operations with similar equipment and is continuing operations to this day. So Golder's review of the site history encompassed both GE, ChemFab, and the Saint-Gobain history. And what you see on the screen is an excerpt from one of the Golder figures in the supplemental site investigation report. And this shows some of the 25 potential release areas, and they're outlined in blue. And what you see, it's kind of a complex, busy figure, and that is because many of the potential release areas overlap with one another. And in the site investigation report, Golder had a table that listed each of the potential release areas and also provided a list of corresponding wells and borings that were designed to evaluate each of those respective PRAs. And in many cases, some of the wells monitor or are designed to investigate multiple PRAs. And I've kind of highlighted monitoring well 4S, which many of you may be familiar with in that it has had the highest detection of PFOA at the site to date. Close to 70,000 parts per trillion was identified last year in 2019. And you can see that that well is located towards the lower left-hand corner of the screen, which is down hydraulic gradient from several PRAs. So it just makes it somewhat complicated to identify some of the sources, and it takes a lot of detective work. So with that, can we move to the next slide, Mike? So this is a diagram I came up with, and I'm going to say right off the bat that it's not intended to represent actual state conditions so much as it is to kind of convey the conceptual ideas of the site investigation and some of the pathways that the investigation is looking at. So for example, I've sketched on a hypothetical sanitary sewer line and a storm sewer line. Those are in red and blue respectively. Those are not in the actual location of where those storm lines are, but just for the purpose of this figure, I've added them. I've also shown pathways for emissions and represented those atmospheric emissions as little circles that land on the ground. And then at the bottom right of the slide, there is a three-dimensional cutout. So what you're looking at is my schematic representation of the subsurface, so below ground. The water table is indicated by the blue line. And I've kind of color-coded the different potential spills or releases to kind of signify that each one might have a different specific PFAS starting chemistry. So one might have different PFAS from the other. And what happens is when you have several of these releases in close proximity, you have a commingling of the plume. So you have, in some cases, mixtures of chemistries. So in the case of monitoring well 4S that I talked about, that may be representative of water with mixtures of a combination of different releases. So just kind of an illustration of the complexity that we're finding at this site. Next slide, Mike. So to talk kind of generally about site investigations, it involves a four-dimensional analysis in that, the contaminants in map view is important, but, in some instances, even greater importance is the third dimension, the vertical dimension, what is going on below ground, because geology varies not only in plan view, but also in the third dimension. And particularly at this site, when you drill a well close to the facility, you often start out in alluvial sands, but within a few feet, you can quickly transition into, in some cases, clay, which is kind of represented by the little brown squiggles in the middle of the cross section. And then as you drill deeper at the facility, you often get into a till layer, which is left behind by the glaciers. And that has different hydrologic properties than the overlying sands at the top. And that's represented by the sort of blue layer in the cross section. And finally, you get into bedrock, and that is represented by the pink color, and that groundwater flow in bedrock is largely controlled by fractures. And sort of the fourth dimension is the time component. And at this site, that has particular importance because, it dates back to, or the use of PFOA and PFAS dates back to 1984. And, the magnitude of emissions has changed over time, as well as the, suspected composition of those chemicals that were in use. So for example, around the 2006-2007 timeframe, there was a major shift from using PFOA dominated chemicals in their processes to chemicals that had kind of the next generation or new shorter chain compounds, as it was recognized that the PFOA and C8 compounds presented potential health effects. So, that's one factor that we have to consider. And there's a lot of other complexity I didn't list on this slide, such as vertical water flow directions, changes in geochemistry that, can provide clues on understanding, how the aquifer the system work and the fate and transport of contaminants. Next slide, Mike, please. So this slide kind of lists off some of the wells and work that is done with the different phases of investigation. There have been several phases of investigation conducted at the site. I'm not going to read them all, but kind of the key takeaway is that since 2016, this was first discovered, the contamination was discovered, nearly 50 monitoring wells were installed at different levels in the aquifer, ranging from shallow, 5 to 10 feet, down to the bottom of the overburden and on into fractured bedrock. So from those 50 so monitoring wells, there's been hundreds of groundwater samples, numerous soil samples collected from soil borings, and the stormwater and surface water investigation involved a separate 190 in individual samples. So this investigation is substantial in magnitude. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show a series of figures that I've annotated for clarity. These figures are from Golder Associates and their reports. I've listed the reference in the gray box on the right-hand side. So this figure shows the overburdened groundwater contours, and I've added interpreted directions based on those groundwater contours, which are shown as the blue arrows. For reference, north is in the upper right direction of this slide, and the facility is kind of the white blob in the middle, outlined with a black property line. Daniel Webster Highway, Route 3, is the major road near the top of the figure, and the Merrimack River is the black band at the lower part of the figure. And finally, I'll point out Dumpling Brook goes from kind of about the middle upper section of the figure near Route 3 and flows down to the Merrimack River on the left-hand side, kind of about where the yellow contours fade out. There, Mike has his finger sort of tracing that out, or pointer tracing that out. So that's Dumpling Brook. So kind of one of the takeaways from this figure is that the majority of groundwater in the overburden is flowing from beneath the facility towards Dumpling Brook. There is a minor component of groundwater flow that is towards the Merrimack River, kind of where the contours sort of wrap around. Might be a little hard to see at the scale we're viewing this, but there is some minor component of flow towards the Merrimack River. Another thing that is not illustrated here, but I'm going to use this slide to describe it. It's kind of important for understanding the hydrogeology of the site. There is a bedrock trough. So in other words, a buried valley beneath the facility. And that trough is oriented roughly from the north part or the right side of the facility as you're looking at it on the screen. And that trough extends generally towards Dumpling Brook. And it's roughly where the contours are drawn. So, I think that trough is important to keep in mind in conjunction with a bedrock ridge that is located between the facility and the Merrimack River. So about where those two arrows point downward on the page, there's a bedrock high. So if you were to drill a well there, you would encounter bedrock about 10 feet below the ground surface. So I think that bedrock ridge essentially acts to constrain groundwater flow for the most part towards a dumping brook. And I guess we'll move on to the next slide, Mike, please. On this slide, I've highlighted with some black stipple the PFOA contours that Golder Associates put together in their site investigation report. These contours are indicating areas where groundwater contains between 1,000 parts per trillion, kind of the outer contour. And then the two inner contours capture wells that exceeded 5,000 parts per trillion of PFOA. Elsewhere, they're kind of green. I don't know if you can see them at the scale, but there are some green. They're in the 70 to 1,000 part per trillion range for PFOA. So it shows that, you know, the concentrated contamination is right around the facility with an area extending over the bedrock ridge that I described. Next slide, please. Saint-Gobain has indicated that they haven't used PFOS in their dispersions to any great degree. But what we do find is that PFOS is present in stormwater and both groundwater. And, you know, it appears that it has been emitted from the site. You know, one explanation for that is that the PFOS may be derived from impurities in their products, or it may also be derived from other PFAS chemicals that are in the dispersions that are break down into PFOS. So we're not sure exactly which one that is, or maybe a combination of the two, but, you know, I think this figure is pretty clear that PFOS has been emitted from the facility, has been released from the facility, where it's found in concentrations ranging from 70 parts per trillion to greater than 1,000 in the immediate proximity of the plant. And one thing I'd like to point out, you know, kind of an interesting observation is that towards the left-hand side of your screen, there are two wells located on either side of Dumpling Brook, and they contained PFOS at concentrations greater than 70 parts per trillion. So that's somewhat anomalous. And that's also a good example of something in the comment letter that we submitted to Saint-Gobain, where we asked for clarification, because Saint-Gobain's consultant attributed that PFOS to some other unidentified source. We've asked them to identify the source and update the conceptual model, incorporating some of the other geochemical parameters such as chloride and dissolved oxygen into that conceptual model. So I won't say too much more about that unless you have additional questions on it. Let's go to the next slide, Mike, please. So taking a step back and looking at the larger region, and I think I'll address the earlier question about the Greater Water Supply Sampling Program. This figure shows samples from individual water supply wells that are coded with colors to indicate when they exceed the respective standards. So for example, on the left-hand side of your screen, the red and purple dots represent water supply wells that have been sampled that exceeded 70 parts per trillion. On the right-hand side is the same data set, but it's been coded differently to show wells that exceed the 12 part per trillion as red and purple. So looking at the left-hand side, you can see that nearly all of the red and purple wells are contained within the area labeled the pre-GMZ boundary. So that's shown in red hash marks. So most of the wells that exceeded the 70 parts per trillion, which was the standard adopted in 2016, are contained by the pre-GMZ, and those exceedances have, for the most part, been addressed by Saint-Gobain by extending water lines, or are scheduled to be extended this summer, as is the case with Southern Litchfield, Charles Bancroft Highway area. So looking at the right-hand side, you can see that there are a number of exceedances of 12 parts per trillion for PFOA between the pre-GMZ area and the outer consent decree boundary, which is shown in blue. At DES's request, Saint-Gobain issued a work plan when the standards went into effect on September 30th, 2019. And the purpose of that work plan was to present a plan to identify which wells may exceed that new standard that had previously not been identified. They implemented a sampling program that everybody recognized right from the beginning was going to be large scope, potentially sampling thousands of wells. We also recognized that was going to be an iterative, ongoing process. So each iteration of wells that were proposed to be sampled, those results would inform the next iteration. And Saint-Gobain got as far as issuing 3 addendums to that initial work plan that identified over 800 wells for sampling. Saint-Gobain to date has only issued access letters to properties that were listed in the original work plan and addendum 1. And that's something in the order of 500 properties, over 500 properties. Of those 500 properties, approximately 300 plus have been sampled. Some of those are undeveloped or may not have a well, or the resident may have declined. So everyone who has requested, of those 500, everyone who was requested to be sampled has been sampled. And in instances where the sample exceeds the 12 parts per trillion, Saint-Gobain has provided alternate water and continues to do so, even though a Superior Court judge has blocked DES's enforcement of those standards. If people collect a water sample on their own, submit it to DES or Saint-Gobain, and it exceeds 12 parts per trillion for PFOA, Saint-Gobain has also issued bottled water in nearly all cases for properties located within the consent decree. They continue, Saint-Gobain and their consultants continue to issue biweekly updates. Those are posted on One Stop. So they tally up the exact count of the number of wells that have been sampled. Separate from that sampling initiative, there are several initiatives that were wrapped into one sampling effort in 2019 work plan before the standards changed. And one of the main purposes of that work plan was to identify temporal trends or to identify how PFOA and PFOS change over time in certain wells located in and around the pre-GMZ. And kind of a secondary goal was to evaluate if there's a potential for PFAS to migrate away from areas where residents have been connected to public water and discontinued well use. So to kind of monitor trends at the boundary of the pre-GMZ while the standard was still 70. And Saint-Gobain is currently in the process of collecting another round of sample from somewhere on the order of 30 to 40 wells, pending permission and availability of outside spigots due to COVID-19. So I guess that concludes my presentation. So I'll be happy to open it up for any other questions. Turn it over to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? You can hit raise hand at the bottom of the participants window if you click participants. Anyone see a raised hand? I'm trying to look. Do you have any questions? Mr. Woods, Representative Woods. You need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Thank you. This is rather in the weeds technical point, but just for my own edification, with the PFAS, when we're testing this either in the air, groundwater, et cetera, we think of these as standalone individual molecular entities. But is that the form that they normally take, or are there aggregates that can occur? And if so, they occur around another particle in some way, such that affects, first of all, detection. So it would affect the level or the remediation. And we think about this in the medical arena and other areas in terms of the formation of clathrates or micelles, which can really dramatically alter a molecular level. Does that occur with PFOs in any way?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I think in the site investigation or hydrogeologic world, we kind of refer to that as partitioning of the PFAS. Right. So I think the individual PFAS compounds have a different propensity to partition. So for example, we tend to find PFOS concentrated in the shallowest of soil samples, whereas PFOA relative to PFOS has a greater tendency to move through the soil column. So we actually find or tend to find some of the higher concentrations of PFOA a few feet below ground. It varies from sample to sample or sample point to sample point, but PFOA tends to move further in the soil relative to PFOS, which might be reflective of the higher concentrations to some extent, although I think the magnitude of PFOA emitted was greater than PFOS. And then another point where these PFAS chemicals tend to partition is at the air-water interface. So at the water table, it's thought that these chemicals may tend to concentrate just based on their physical properties.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Bone, or Representative Bone, excuse me.
Thank you. On the quick note that Representative Janine Nada came in late, so need to be on the attendance. But a question from one of the first slides of showing the airflow, which sort of contradicts one of the findings that the very first house on that, can't think of the street in Litchfield, closest to the river, had the lowest amount of PFOA in their water. Now, could it be they had a deeper well than the other houses on that street, or what? But it seems to contradict that slide showing where the greatest amounts should have been.
That's an excellent question. I believe I'm familiar with the exact area that you're referring to. Some of the closest houses to Saint-Gobain directly across the river have relatively low concentrations of PFOA. And I think there's two potential explanations, or maybe even three, as to why that's occurring. And if you look at the hydrogeology or the geologic deposits in that area, there's a layer of lake bed deposits and alluvial deposits that tend to be siltier and clayier. And I think those deposits tend to retard the movement of PFAS through the soil. And as you move further up the street away from Saint-Gobain, you get into thinner soils and shallower rock. So I think there's a greater chance of the PFAS making it down into the water table there. A second potential explanation for the lower concentrations is that the bedrock wells at those houses may intercept fractures, water-bearing fractures, cracks in the rock. And because they are located close to the river, those cracks could be closer connected to cracks that extend to the river. So, they may be mixing in river water at some extent that dilutes the PFAS. So, a few potential explanations there, but good observation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ayotte.
Yes, thank you. Jeff, you may have said it and I may have missed it, but do you guys know what happens to that bedrock trough as it extends down toward Dumpling Brook? Does it underflow the brook? Is there transport that way, or does it change direction? And I have a couple others as well, but I'll let you go with that.
Yeah, I think not all the wells drilled near Dumpling Brook encountered bedrock. So, I think our resolution on the geometry of the bedrock trough is somewhat more obscured as we get closer to the brook. But I think one observation I'll make is that some of the dissolved oxygen values, the two wells that I highlighted on my slide with the PFOS, I think some of the dissolved oxygen in one case is fairly routinely low, and in the case of the well, kind of where the arrow from that 70 to 1,000 is pointing right at, that well has somewhat variable DO, and recognize it's somewhat hard to measure DO in the field. But if you take those values at face value, I think it indicates to me that there's potentially some contribution of bedrock or flow that has gone through the bedrock discharging to the overburden. But, I don't think either of those wells touch bedrock, if I recall correctly.
Okay. And I guess that leads into my second question, which is the Bedrock Ridge and between the, yeah, right there. And it looks like there's some falls in the river just adjacent to that as well, indicating probably bedrock. Does that, do you guys know much about how that behaves hydrogeologically? For example, is it an entry point of PFAS into the bedrock system where it can then get transported further, or does it appear to not take PFAS on too much? Just wondering about how it works in terms of the transport. Maybe if you know anything about the fluxes between the bedrock and the overburden. Sorry to be technical, but just curious.
No, so I think we have a few ideas about how that bedrock ridge behaves. I think the wells that are drilled into it tend to have a pretty high PFAS, and those are I would characterize as shallow bedrock wells, less than 100 feet deep, and they have PFAS into thousands of parts per trillion. But in Golder's site investigation report, they show groundwater contours for the bedrock. And it's extremely steep. I want to say it's almost 100 feet of relief in the groundwater elevation between the river and the top of that ridge. So that suggests to me that transport or flow through that ridge is restricted, and that the easier pathway is to flow kind of parallel to the Dumpling Brook. And a second line of evidence supporting that is Golder, for the supplemental site investigation, conducted 2 geophysical survey lines, including seismic and resistivity. And I think although there was some anthropogenic noise on the resistivity line, I think overall it showed a higher resistivity for that bedrock ridge, which I think would support the fact that it has a lower density of fractures, or lithology that potentially makes it less conducive to transmitting flow towards the river.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Deitch, you're on mute.
Representative Thomas, please.
Thank you. I first have a comment and then I have a question. My first comment is on the first slide where you talk about the air release and how it affects the water. I would like to see inclusion of vegetative uptake on that slide, because that's a really important part of this. The produce in Merrimack contains PFAS. So just to be transparent, I would like to see that added to that slide. My question, however, is that as many people know, our private well is contaminated to the point where we receive bottled water from Saint-Gobain, as does several other families in my neighborhood. I'm wondering if there is a documented plan by Saint-Gobain to hook us up to public water. My concern is that they're giving us water, which is appreciated, but that because we're being given water, that we've fallen off the radar and nothing is going to be pursued. So I'd like to know if anything is being documented for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Yeah, so the answer is, at this point, there is no documented plan to connect those wells. And partly that's due to the Superior Court decision to block DES's enforcement of the 2019 AGQS. So Saint-Gobain had committed to DES, I think in their work plan, and also verbally, they were committed to providing and coming up with a way to provide a permanent source of clean drinking water to all of the wells that exceeded the 2019 AGQS. Now that those AGQS have been put on hold by the Superior Court, I think they haven't moved forward. Part of the delay in coming up with a plan is that they needed to fully assess the scope of contamination, particularly in the town of Londonderry, that hasn't been widely explored, the full extent there. So, a lot of their sampling efforts were focused on a number of places there, as well as your neighborhood, to delineate all of those. I think there's two two main courses that permanent alternate water would likely take. One is connection to public water. Two is in-home treatment. And, I think in cases where you're located proximal to a water line, that might be a way that that would be remedied in the long term. But, I think until such time as we get enforcement back on those low standards, I don't think St. Cobain will be moving forward with a formal plan to connect.
And you're potentially talking about years, right?
I think years, potentially measured in years in terms of actual connection, using the past as a guide. We're going on 4 years now, and the final wells that exceeded 70 parts per trillion are scheduled to be connected this summer. They were supposed to be completed, that connection was supposed to be completed in the fall. There was due to a change in the tax code that threw a wrench in how Pennachuck would accept the extension of the water line. Kind of a technical tax point that caused that issue.
All right, and my final comment is that I would just like to have the impact of this on property values just be considered in this whole equation. Thank you.
And I hope, Representative Thomas, that you will put that in as a public comment under the various, with NHDES for the various permits. And we do, of course, have a bill has been passed and concurred with in the House that does solidify the lower PFAS acceptable rates, and is, well, has a few steps to go, but will eventually be headed to the governor's desk. Okay, and Ms. Mesmer, you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Jeff, for that presentation. I just have a couple of questions. So can you just point to us, for those of us who may not know, where wells 4 and 5, Merrimack, which direction they're in? Where are the supply wells that Merrimack, the ones that were shut down and the ones that are impacted by PFAS? And if you could do that on the contour flow map, that would be helpful.
Let's see. So I guess I'll just point them out on this regional view where you actually see them. Mike, if you go up along the yellow border, right about at the pre-GMZ boundary, so up a little higher, right about there is where 4 and 5 are located, if you can see Mike's pointer. So St. Cobain is located about 1.5 miles, I believe. I'd have to check that, but right where those purple dots are, now where Mike's pointer is located. So wells 4 and 5 are about 1.5 miles southwest of the facility, roughly on strike with the bedrock and parallel to the river. So Mike, if you go back to, I guess, the slide with the groundwater contours, I can just sort of point in the direction. So it's roughly in the direction of that top arrow that I've drawn, the blue arrow. Pointing towards the left of the screen. That's probably the closest arrow pointing to wells 4 and 5.
Okay. Follow up. I have a few follow-ups if you don't mind.
Absolutely, sure.
So well, MW4, the one that we know has the highest levels of PFOA, that I noticed on one of your slides, it looked like there were several wells there. I just didn't know what the screen, what stratigraphy that screen interval is in. Is it in bedrock? Is it in overburden? Oh, it's 4.
Actually, so well 4, so 4S is the well that had the highest detection, and that screened, approximately 10 feet below ground. So that's screened in the shallow alluvial aquifer, right above a clay layer. Immediately adjacent to that boring are 2 other borings. One is screened in the till layer, the deep overburden, and there's also an adjacent bedrock well. And interestingly, one of the lowest measured concentrations of PFOA at the site is from that adjoining bedrock well. So, you have both the highest and the lowest concentrations at, one particular point on the map.
Okay. And then on your flow contour maps, you were talking about how the majority of flow was to the Dumpling Brook area. But when you look at the groundwater PFOA contours map, it doesn't seem to support that. I assume those PFOA contours are from overburden wells. Is that true? Or are they bedrock wells, or it doesn't specify what screen interval that is?
Yeah, so this overall figure is put together by Golder, and I can't read the fine print here, but I believe that's actually all wells, so independent of depth. So I think one thing to point out, I think that what this shows is that some of the wells over that bedrock ridge, I don't think that is necessarily groundwater flow so much as contamination due to air deposition on the ground, infiltrating down into the shallow overburden, or in some cases, shallow bedrock. I think some of those high concentrations are also in wells that are proximal to sanitary sewer or stormwater lines. So there's some question as to whether some of those detections may be in some way related to stormwater or sanitary wastewater. So I think there's a variety of answers there. It's also somewhat of a question as to what the PFAS plume might be doing in the vertical direction, and whether that's been fully captured.
Thank you.
Ms. Paradis.
Good morning. I just want to thank Representative Thomas for asking about wells that have been contaminated and people that are on bottled water, because I think we don't often talk about some of the Bedford residents that are still getting their test results and are just beginning to go on bottled water. And so it's really disconcerting to hear that there's no real plan moving forward to put some of the Bedford residents on a actual water plan that is not beyond bottled water delivery. I know that some people are just starting to get their water delivery and are kind of running into some troubles getting it from Monadnock. And I know there's concerns with, I know people had the Culligan systems installed, and based on being on wells, it really slows the water flow. And I'm just wanted to go on record confirming that we don't have a plan to move forward to connect those outside of the 1.5 mile radius, because we only connected up till 1.5 miles outside up to the top of Veronica and Green Meadow Lane here in Bedford. We do have people beyond that, at least 1 mile to 1.5 miles beyond that scope. And if I also, to follow up, I have concerns on your last slide, looking at, if I'm reading it correctly, on the left from 2016, there was a lot of green spots in Bedford. And now on the right, as effective September 30th, 2019, a lot of people are going in that 70 to under 400 parts per trillion. That's very alarming and concerning. And I think it should be imperative that we look at getting some water access connectivity in the Bedford area. And those are just my concerns. And if I'm reading that correctly, I think it's really alarming for the people of Bedford.
Yeah, if I could maybe start with your second point, just to clarify, the concentrations haven't necessarily increased to 70 to 400 parts per trillion. I've just scaled them differently to reflect which wells exceed 12 parts per trillion. So the standard changed. So, you may have a well that was at, say, 30 parts per trillion. Now I would code that as red instead of green.
Thank you so much. I probably mentally knew that, it just didn't come out. Still, it is alarming because I do hear from people in our community that their wells are contaminated, and what they thought was clean drinking water is not, and they have to be on bottled water. And I know, having lived through this and kind of the PTSD that's associated with having lived on bottled water and trying to live on a clean water source, I still don't trust it, especially knowing that there's still pollution going out into the air, seeing the maps and, watching the water flows and the air flows. It's not comforting to say the least.
So if I could circle back then to your first point. So there is no formal plan to connect anybody that is below the 70 parts per trillion, but above the 2019 12-part per trillion standard. But what Saint-Gobain had indicated was to us in meetings is that their intention was to, as data came in with their sampling program that they initiated in September 30th, 2019, that as that data came in and they started to get a better picture on the distribution of wells that exceed 12 parts per trillion, their intention was to be working on a plan and to be fast tracking that. So I think if according to Saint-Gobain, if the judge hadn't, or they had said this, so I'm kind of extrapolating, but if the judge hadn't blocked DES's enforcement of the low standards, the new health-based standards, Saint-Gobain would probably be in a position to at least be roughing out a plan at this point today. I think they would have probably sampled potentially a few thousand wells by now and had a better handle.
I appreciate that. I understand that is also probably Saint-Gobain fighting against these standards as well. So I just would like to go on record with that and just know that there's a lot of confusion going on in Bedford, especially since it was limited at first to 60 some odd homes, and it is now increased, and looking at these numbers is again not comforting at all. Thank you.
Well, we can hope we get a signature from the governor soon that will clarify things. Ms. Mesmer.
Yeah, and to that point, so I just wanted to ask DES, the bill, House Bill 1264, has moved through both the House and the Senate, is on its way to the governor. It will be effective upon passage, upon signing. So I want to know what, and there was some conversation, my questions about, only the air permit final version, having addressed 2 of the PFAS compounds. There will be 4 that they will need to address upon passage of that bill, and sort of looking at the timeframes of how these will be crossing over each other and how, in terms of the schedule for the variance request and the passage of the bill, and then also whether or not and sort of to Ms. Paradis's question, the blue area, beyond the blue area, what are the plans then that will follow to expand that area through a consent decree or something that will include areas that she was referring to. So I kind of wanted to know where the DES feels all these moving parts will fall in terms of the air permit, the variance request, the sampling program, and the HB 1264 passage. I mean, we're confident, hopeful that the governor will sign that and it will become effective immediately. So I want to know where all these pieces will sort of fall into place.
I guess I'll answer just briefly on the sampling plan. So in recognition that, the court could come up with a new decision or, there'd be a legislative solution, I have been talking with Saint-Gobain on an ongoing basis, making sure that they are ready to re-implement the sampling plan once those rules become enforceable again. And, they have said that, or their consultant has stated that they have staffing to ramp sampling back up should those numbers become enforceable. And I'll let maybe Mike or Kathy answer the other parts to your question.
Sure. This is Mike Wimsatt. So I think Jeff put that very well. I mean, the court's decision was unfortunate. I think at the very least, it's put us back many months in additional sampling done inside the consent decree area. And it set, Saint-Gobain's decision, because of the court decision not to pursue the sampling under those addenda, meant that there's a delay built into getting this additional data. But again, as I think everyone on the call knows, House Bill 64 essentially became an omnibus PFAS bill. There were provisions of several other bills that contain PFAS provisions that were incorporated into it. And as has been said, it's been passed. My understanding is it was enrolled on July 10th. So the steps now are for, I guess, the Senate President to pass that along to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State to pass it to the governor's desk. So we don't know how long that will take, but presumably it won't be a long period of time. And it's certainly our hope that, our expectation that the governor will sign it. If the governor does sign the bill, then, those provisions will, and those MCLs will take effect, and the AGQS will take effect. And, it's certainly our hope, and I think Jeff has indicated that Saint-Gobain would then really resume its original plan, sampling in the addenda that they had submitted to us. Again, we're a few months back because of the course decision, but we would hope to see that advance, and we'd be working to ensure that that advances promptly, and that eventually very likely leads to additional areas within the consent decree area being scheduled for water line connections. So, and again, those things take time, as people in this community know very well. But we'll be working to advance those as promptly as we can. With respect to the air permit and the RTO and whether that would address these additional 2 compounds that are being regulated, Kathy, I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah. So there is a provision in our rules that doesn't need to be changed at all that allows us to open up a permit and add more limits into the permit. One aspect, it's not really the variance that plays into this, more so the town of Merrimack's appeal plays into this, and that is that while we could add limits to the permit for those 2 compounds, the methodology in which we calculated them is part of the town of Merrimack's appeal. And those limits really are about the portion of the statute that talks about after the controls are installed that they can't cause or contribute to groundwater contamination. So it's sort of like we could put them in, but they're part of the appeal. So, you know, they won't necessarily be something that would be enforceable till the control device is installed. It's sort of like a cart and horse kind of thing. We could put them in, but they wouldn't mean anything until all the other parts of this have been resolved. So we've talked about how that process would go, but at this point, it's the way that the calculations were done for those limits. It wasn't based on the actual standards. It was based on detectability in water samples. So it's sort of separate. It's just a matter of which pollutants I can limit based on the laws in place at the time. Does that make sense?
So no, so would it then, I'm not quite sure I'm clear. So let's assume that the bill will be signed by August 1st and go into effect immediately. What will that mean for those additional 2 compounds in terms of the air permit or the variance, or do they have to go back and address the town of Merrimack's request to add those 2 back in and recalculate how will that work?
So we can add the 2 compounds in and add an emission limitation into the permit. There's a provision for how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. The calculation of what those limits are is part of what the town of Merrimack is appealing. And so while we could put them in, they may then be changed as a result of the appeal. And since those standards only apply once the control device is installed,
I see.
It doesn't make a lot of efficiency sense to put them in only to have them change later and have to start all over again when they don't apply until the controls are in place.
Thank
Makes
you.
sense.
Representative Baum.
Yes, thank you. Just want to comment on the bill that the governor has. It includes other things, including, I believe, a Seacoast cancer cluster investigation. So it's not just the PFAS stuff on it, but most of it is. I mean, there is 4 bills in that one bill. So it's anyone's guess on what the governor's going to do.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for NHDES?
Yes, Jean, this is me. I wasn't able to raise my hand since I'm a host, but I have a couple questions. And Jeff, thank you so much for a great presentation. You talked about the Dumpling Brook, the contamination there, that there's a well next to it. What's the outfall for that? Does that go all into the Merrimack River?
Yeah, so Dumpling Brook does go and empties in its entirety into the Merrimack River.
Okay. Now, south of the Dumpling Brook, there's a new apartment complex, pretty large, called Gilbert Crossing. And I was wondering if there has been any groundwater testing there, because those apartments are now in occupancy.
So the developer of that property did installed some of their own wells and took soil samplings. And so that has been tested. I think the levels, while I don't have them off the top of my head, are generally consistent with some of the concentrations that we're seeing in the area immediately surrounding Saint-Gobain.
Okay. And Representative Thomas had mentioned about vegetation has been absorbing PFAS. And I was wondering, does the state have any data on that, actual testing data on vegetation in general, and then in Gilbert Brook property specifically?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any actual tests on produce samples. Saint-Gobain was asked to do some garden soil sampling, and they did that in the neighborhood that would be to the south of that new development. I think there was a garden generally in that area along perhaps Route 3. And I think the concentrations in the garden soil weren't any higher than some of the levels that we've seen in some of the other soil sampling efforts further from Saint-Gobain. So I think generally under 5 parts per trillion, or 5 parts per billion, excuse me.
Okay, so we don't have any data from produce or vegetation from Saint-Gobain.
No, we don't. And that the uptake of PFAS into produce is kind of an area of new and ongoing scientific inquiry. And I think one thing in talking to our toxicologist here at DES, he's been tracking some of the studies on that, and there's a lot of complexity. If you grow lettuce in 2 different places with different soils, some of the soil properties affect the uptake of PFAS. So it's difficult to take a number from soil value and translate that to an uptake of produce.
Okay, thanks. And then I have one other question. I had asked DES this probably a year and a half ago, and they were looking into it. I was just wondering if there's any more progress in defining a PFAS profile from a point source. So can we say that PFAS in this well definitively came from Saint-Gobain's operation or some other operation?
That's a great question. It's one, I've taken a lot of interest in since, I've been working on this project. And, I think there's several difficulties with that. And we talked a little bit earlier on about how PFAS have a tendency to partition in both the soil and at the air sort of water interface in the soil. So what that means is that different PFAS, so if you release PFAS, say 50% PFOA and 50% PFOS, for example, if you poured that on the ground and let that move through an aquifer, eventually you're going to have a lot more PFOA, so a higher percentage of PFOA as you move further along the flow path and measure it, because PFOS has a tendency to adsorb to the soil a greater propensity. So, we sometimes talk about fingerprinting, and the fingerprint, so to speak, would change with distance and time travel through the aquifer. So that's one complexity. I've looked at sort of the, PFAS assemblage in wells throughout Saint-Gobain, and, I think there's probably 10 different fingerprints on the property itself. If I could use the word fingerprint, I use that with caution. So there's a lot of variability just on the property itself, much more than I anticipated before the site investigation was far underway. So it's a challenge.
Representative Thomas.
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback off of the comments about vegetation. A year ago, I attended a PFAS conference in Boston, and Italy and Australia has done a lot of work in this area, and they've documented PFAS uptake in meat, eggs, and produce. That's it, just a comment.
Thank you. If that's all the questions for NHDES, thank you very much for all your preparation and for meeting during this time when it's rather difficult and with losing Mr. Fries and so forth. And I thank you. What we are required at every meeting to have a report from NHDES and also from HHS. So what I would like to do next is have a brief report from HHS. And then I want to talk a little bit about what we need to accomplish over the next few months.
Excuse me, Senator, you said this would be an
Oh,
appropriate
yes,
time.
yes. My apologies, my apologies.
Okay.
Town of Merrimack. Let's hear from the town of Merrimack before we go to HHS. I'm sorry.
I don't mean to be rude. I just wanted to make sure I had the
No,
opportunity. Thank
it's
you.
your turn. It's your turn.
Thank you. Okay, in terms of the sewer, as it makes sense, there is drainage from the St. Cobain site into our wastewater treatment plant via our public sewage. Right now, there are no standards for biosolids. We, in fact, make biosolids at the plant. We have sludge that we sell. Right now, there are no standards, but the EPA and DES are looking into that. So being proactive, the director of our wastewater in their in their sewer permit, which St. Cobain has applied for, have put PFOA or PFAS into the permit in terms of criteria, because that's something we're going to maybe have to meet. So voluntarily, St. Cobain installed a filtration system prior, as the fluid comes from the manufacturing. There's a filtration system, and then there is a site where they pull samples. Then it continues on to the sewer. And as it attaches to our main sewer line, there is a manhole number 8. So those are important things for you to understand. So the filtration system was installed, and St. Cobain has made a determination that they will test at their site, which is right after the filtration system, for PFOA every 2,200 gallons. We are saying that there has to be calibration of that filtration system more frequently based upon what is being manufactured. For example, if they are manufacturing something with more PFOA or PFOS, then they should calibrate the filtration system to accommodate that, so it's more effective. They're saying that's totally unnecessary. So that's one of the things that the air permit is being withheld on, because that procedure has to be established. The other issue is at that manhole 8, less than 2 weeks ago, we took another sample of the sewage going into our sewage, and the PFOA was 500 parts per trillion, and the PFOS was 500 parts per trillion. So clearly, that is coming from somewhere, whether it's the effluents from the site, or is it leaching in from the groundwater? Part of our concern is, regardless of where it's coming from, that amount of PFOA and PFOS is going into our biosolids, which is going to affect our sludge. So the sewer permit was withheld. St. Cobain appealed it to the town council. The town council held a public meeting to have the appeal. St. Cobain did not show up, but did appeal to the Superior Court. So presently, the question is in Superior Court, and we are paying legal fees, obviously, for that as well. They're saying that the amount of PFOA and PFOS is so minuscule from their plant that it's not contributing. And whatever is, and I have to say this, trying not to laugh now. One of their arguments is the PFOA is coming from the MVD water that they use. Now, how did the PFOA get into the MVD water? From St. Cobain. So it's a circular argument that's difficult to get away from. So at present, they are being able to drain because it's in Superior Court. And that is, let me make sure I have anything else. Yeah, they're saying there's no need for more frequent testing. They don't believe recalibration should be done more frequently depending upon their manufacturing process, that it should just be a standard 2,200, that their contribution is minuscule, and PFOA should not even be part of the criteria for a permit. So that's where we stand at the moment. Hopefully I did that quickly but efficiently.
Well, thank you. Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Harrington? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on for a report from HHS and then talk about what we need to accomplish and how we're going to do it under the COVID situation.
Sure, I'll start. I just want to start by introducing Dr. Katie Bush. Several of you are familiar with Katie and might have worked with her on past initiatives. So I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but due to, as you might imagine, with COVID-19, we've had to think about how our resources are allocated. And with the extension of the Seacoast Cancer Cluster Commission, I will be moving onto that commission in Dr. Chan's place. And in turn, Dr. Bush is moving onto this commission in my place. So I'm very excited that she's able to be a part of this. I think she's going to be a great asset to the commission. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Bush for updates, but I've enjoyed serving with all of you on this commission, and I look forward to continuing to follow the work that you do. And I expect that there will be some overlap because of, similar interests across both of the commissions. So I expect that I'll see you all again.
And I thank you again for serving. And as I've said to Ms. Craver, we encourage subcommittees to work with the Cancer Cluster and any other relevant ones to combine hearings so that we don't overburden HHS. And thank you and welcome, Dr. Bush.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Karen. And I'm grateful that she's here to sort of guide me through the transition. So with that, I'll start with a couple updates, just building on what Karen mentioned. Obviously, due to the COVID pandemic, as well as the office redesign, DPHS staff have largely been working remotely and juggling just a lot of priorities. We are able to maintain pretty active collaboration just with the tools like Zoom and others. So able to maintain our normal workload there. We continue to participate in a Dartmouth-led effort to develop those PFAS outreach materials specific to New Hampshire. And as those documents are available, we will share them for review and comment. Let's see, a few updates from the chronic disease program, or the cancer program specifically. There is an amendment underway with Dartmouth, who oversees the cancer registry contract, to include some funding from the Groundwater Trust Fund, focused on the state's work related to environmental and childhood related cancers. This funding will cover a literature review for environmentally caused childhood cancers, analysis of radiological monitoring data for the Seacoast Nuclear Power Plant at Seabrook, a conference convening of experts in childhood cancer, as well as a reanalysis of childhood cancer data in New Hampshire and nationally, as well as just additional information gathering from families and children affected by cancer to better understand their unmet needs to inform the health department in terms of future program planning. While we're building out work in that area, I do think it's also important to note that the CDC has reduced overall funding to the cancer program in SFY 21. And so clearly the department is having discussions around the impact these reductions will have on the capacity of the department, as well as the Dartmouth portion of the cancer registry, to continue to provide high quality cancer data to researchers and public health professionals. In addition to that, a few other updates. So the biomonitoring program, I think many of you are familiar with the TRACE surveillance study, which set out to collect a wealth of data from about 350 residents, both water quality data as well as human specimen biomonitoring data. Those final participant summary reports are nearing completion. At this point, all of the sampling is complete, and we've been working hard collaboratively with them to analyze that data and hope that those reports will be available in the next couple of months. In addition, I think since this commission has met the last time, New Hampshire was awarded the ATSDR Apple Tree Grant. I think everyone knew we had applied, but we were in fact, as of April, awarded that grant. And that, just as a reminder or as background, that grant has sort of two portions. One is specific to site-specific investigations with a community outreach and education component. And then a second portion of that grant is called the Choose Safe Places for Early Care and Education, which is focused specifically on creating safe places for children with a focus on childcare facilities and incorporating environmental health criteria into the siting of those facilities, as well as the licensing of those facilities. In addition, we recently put in another collaborative application to CDC's National Center for Environmental Health. This is the Division of Public Health along with the DES, focused on well water quality and really making that data available to the public and stakeholders to, again, sort of drive our community and outreach efforts. And so just several great examples of the collaborative work happening across the departments. I should note that both the ATSDR and NCEH, National Center for Environmental Health grants, sit with DES, and then DPHS, the health department, is named as a sub-awardee of those grants. I know I was asked, I think in the agenda specifically, to provide an update regarding the letter that was sent from the health subcommittee to the department regarding storing blood samples from the MVD study. Unfortunately, I think thanks to many folks, I don't think that letter was received, perhaps as a result of COVID. And so that letter was just resent. And so hopefully when we meet again, we will be able to address the questions and comments that were in that letter, again, asking about the consent procedure for the MVD exposure survey and the ability to store those samples. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and again, welcome Karen to add any details that I may have overlooked.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Dr. Bush or Ms. Craver? Or Dr. Craver?
Dr. Bush, would you be able to send me your notes of your report or your written report?
I will, yes.
Dr. Craver spoiled me, so
yes, she is.
I can just cut and paste. Thank you.
Yes, yep.
Yes, setting expectations. Representative Woods. Representative Woods, did you have a question? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I just got it. Thank you. You mentioned working with the Hitchcock in terms of PFAS educational materials. I know in the past, and speaking for the Medical Society, they were involved as well. I would like to see them in that, continue in that loop. Do you know if they are actively involved in that? I would hope so. If not, I would be more than delighted to tickle them to continue on.
Do you mean whether the Medical Society is still involved, or whether
the State Medical Society? I know in the past they had been working with the Hitchcock and a group, and you didn't mention them, but
sure. Well, I do know that Dr. Chan is playing a role, and he surely can also represent that society. But I'll let Karen maybe add. I know that she also is working as part of that work group. But if the Medical Society is explicitly represented there.
I don't believe the Medical Society is explicitly represented on the Dartmouth-led group, and Representative Thomas can also probably comment on this. But I do know, so the group, it's being led by the Toxic Metals Superfund Research Program, which unfortunately didn't receive continued funding, but they have committed to continuing forward with this specific project. I would be happy to connect with the lead of that group. If you want to maybe email me a contact person, I can.
Sure. I'll
There's
do that.
room for involvement.
Representative Thomas, did you have something to add?
Yes, with regards to that last comment, we did talk about including specific physicians and pediatric nurses in the review of the materials, but not the Medical Society per se. But my comment about the previous presentation was you had talked about a private well water safety program. Is that specifically for PFAS, or does that include other contaminants as well?
That will include other contaminants as well.
But it will include PFAS?
It will, yep. So we don't even know if that award has been granted yet. All we have done is submit the application. But yes, the idea is that it will be sort of a data discovery data exploration project to use the available well water quality data that we have on multiple contaminants to then guide our outreach and education efforts.
Okay, and then you mentioned the water remediation fund, and there's also a proposed PFAS remediation fund. Neither of those cover private wells. Is there anything? Is this grant going to cover the testing of these wells, or?
That is sort of yet to be determined if the grant award is made. One idea is right now DES and DPHS go out and do some outreach and education in communities, and as part of that, advertise or promote private well water testing. But so right now there is no discussion of paying for those tests, but to go out and encourage that individual homeowners do conduct those tests.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Bush. I just wanted to follow up on the trace biomonitoring study. I know back in March, that was one of our discussions, and at that point, we were told that everything had been completed and the data was just getting put together, and we would be hearing from DHHS. Do you have a sense? I know you said a couple of months. Do we like really have a better sense?
It's hard. Yeah, I understand
Yes,
it. It's tough. The reality is that the public health lab, as you might imagine, has just been inundated with COVID response, and the biomonitoring staff in particular have been put on COVID response efforts. And so a lot of that work was put on hold for a number of weeks. I can say that the staff are back on biomonitoring at this point. So pending a major surge in sampling and response related to COVID, I'm optimistic that we'll make some progress. So I don't want to promise a date, but certainly we're hoping in the next few weeks to have some drafts of those reports, and certainly by the end of the year have that final report.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is, do you have a sense of, in that, I know it was a relatively small study, but do you have a sense of, from the impacted areas that this commission is looking at, how many actual people here in this community were being tested? Merrimack, Bedford, Litchfield.
I should have done my homework, but that is a sub-analysis of the data that we're currently working on, because we want to be able to speak to that in the report. And so when those data are available, we can bring that to this commission.
Okay,
and
great.
so I can't answer that right now, but I will bring that back.
Thank you.
All right, are there any more questions for HHS? Thank you very much for your presentation, and welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do now is just run through the presentation that will be very familiar to some of you, but just to remind people again of where we started and where we are headed here. So you'll recall that we decided that in addition to the requirements of the RSA, that our number one goal was to ensure that ongoing emissions are reduced below the required limit. So just keeping that in mind as we go forward, that really that is our number one priority. But in addition to that, we are required to do an annual report, which is due in November. In order to do that, for those of you who are new, we divided ourselves into subcommittees, and these are the four: environment, health, policy, and communications. And I have, yes, I did update this one, but I know I did not update the health one. So you'll see, Mr. Wimsett, that you are on the environmental subcommittee by default. In RSA 126A79A, there are responsibilities that we have assigned to that committee. And actually, NHDES has done most of this. You'll see that there are a few notes here that we have. A lot of this information is already known, or at least starting to be known. I think Perhaps the assessing of soil regulations is not. But we will have to think, what we're thinking of now is each group is going to have to come up with a chapter for our final report. So what you'll need to do with each subcommittee is to go through and figure out which ones of these you're able to address at this point. This commission is a 3-year commission. We'll have to put an end of year report every year. So presumably the soil regulation assessment may take place later. But what we have to do is figure out which of these we can address this year and how those will be reported out. Next, we have the Health Committee. And of course, Ms. Craver is being replaced by Dr. Bush. But the responsibilities assigned to the Health Committee are these, which was number 2, assessing and implementing steps. Again, you have done a lot of the work necessary for this to happen. It's when we get to the assessing of rules and regulations and whether or not they're adequate that I don't believe the subcommittees have started to do yet. But what we'll do, we have a 3-year time frame. What we'll do is figure out where we are and what we're able to accomplish of these responsibilities at this point in time. And we will have to put that together in a report for November. The entire commission, we're to be keeping copies of correspondence. The review by state and federal agencies and their partners is part of what NHDES and HHS gives us each month. And anyone else who is aware, that's part of our reporting here. And assessing future agreements. What we've done with this number 14 so far is we have learned that we cannot play any role in the agreement, but we can assess them after the fact. The state's attorney told us that or Attorney General told us that we can assess them after the fact and propose additional actions based on that. But we obviously as a commission are not involved in negotiations. So this is a responsibility that will be part of the overview in our final report. We'll take a look at what we want to accomplish there. And then finally, we have our policy recommendations. I don't know how far we will get with that this year, but eventually we will, based on our report. What we should say is, at minimum, have a plan for how we expect to get to our policy decisions. And hopefully some kind of vague schedule. Of course, with COVID, we can't make it a very detailed schedule. But I would like, and you'll see also, Mr. Wimsatt, that I put you on the policy committee, and I'm guessing that you'll want to be on that committee in order to make sure that anything we propose is reasonable. Dr. Bush, if you would like to be on that committee, we also would welcome you there. And finally, we have to report out to the public and make them aware of what's going on. And we do that by our clerk, Rosemary, has done a wonderful job of making sure that things get posted, and Representative Thomas as well, and Murphy have made sure that we get things posted to the website and that the public is aware of what's going on. So those are what we have been charged with in RSA 126-79A. And what I've done here is put together a draft of deadlines in order to get to this final report. So this is just a suggestion, but perhaps by August 7th, we could have outlines, each subcommittee putting together their outline, and then passing them to the full commission. I am not certain, I have not been promised that we can have another meeting. We are the only commission meeting at this time, other than the Education Funding Commission. And I am not sure that we are going to be able to have another meeting. This was called as an emergency meeting based on the fact that we do have significant PFAS release, and we're very concerned about what's going on as a result of the letter. But I have not been told yet by the legislature that we will be permitted to have another meeting. So I am suggesting, provided that it meets with our RTK, right to know requirements, that we work on our report in this manner, and that as we submit these outlines, that they will be made public, and that then we will have comments and revisions, which will be made public. And then we draft our chapters by September 4th. So basically we have a couple of weeks between each of these deadlines. And then the communications subcommittee will be responsible for final edits and writing an introduction and so forth. And I see I've misspelled communications, but at any rate. Then we will have submit the report to the legislature. So those are deadlines and a method. And I don't know what people want to think about that, but I'd like to hear feedback. Yes, Ms. Medley.
So I have a question about that. Do we, as a subcommittee, are we going to be facilitated a meeting so that we can come up with the outlines, or do we? Because I'm aware, I think that we have to do that in public, don't we? When we're working on a work product like that.
Well, let's see if we can get, yeah. So, well, if we can't do anything by email, then we're going to be pretty limited. It's going to be pretty difficult to get a report out. So we'll have to ask. To have it postponed then, because obviously if we can't meet and we have to meet in order to work together, we can't create a report. So I will have to investigate that more. Anyway, Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Deach. I just have a question in regard to not being able to meet. And given the importance of this meeting, I'm just wondering, since this commission was inspired by citizen concerns around the health impacts of PFAS and the state identified polluter Saint-Gobain, given that there's that August 5th virtual hearing for the variance that Saint-Gobain's requested on the extension, which I think Merrimack residents certainly believe will just continue to prolong our exposure and impact health here. And given that our commission, I see our role as being important to have input into that. I would hope that maybe as a commission that we could present, whether in the form of a letter or some kind of in some way be able to meet to have to make a statement toward that can be included in that virtual hearing for August 5th. So I don't know how us not being able to meet will, I feel like this is our role here. This is the time we should be speaking up and voicing, the concerns that we have and the information that we've been able to acquire, especially around the health impacts. And I know it's certainly uncharted territories, but I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to do that.
Did someone else? What I think perhaps, Representative Murphy, I think perhaps you and I and Representative Rung should work with legislative leadership to make them see the urgency of this. And so perhaps what we should do then is go ahead and try to schedule an August meeting for, I believe our let's see, the 7th is when our next scheduled meeting would have been if we had been on our regular schedule. So we can work with, I think we're going to have to work with both Senate and House leadership and communicate that urgency and try to get together to make that happen. Now, I know that when we put together the letter that went to HHS, a single individual drafted that letter. Because we do need to do some work in between time. We can't sit down and write something as an entire group, but just, so I perhaps what we want to do is to ask someone to bring forward a draft of each chapter. So maybe that's what we want to do is right now assign a single person to draft an outline that would be brought together at the next meeting that we are going to try to convince legislative leadership to let us hold. And so I would ask then for a volunteer to draft the outline for the environmental chapter. Yes, Ms. Mesmer's hand is up doubly. So, so we would ask Ms. Mesmer to do that. And likewise, could someone write an outline for the health chapter? Is that you, Ms. Representative Murphy? Your hands up? Okay.
Yes.
That's great. So I think then we are charged with, and I hope that Senator Chandley is still here and will help also with this, to communicate the urgency of holding another meeting. And I think mentioning those deadlines, though this is not going to be before the 5th. The 7th would be our regular meeting. Representative Murphy, do you think it's essential that we meet before the 5th?
Well, in order to meet the time frame of that hearing, which is on August 5th, I think we'd have to. I mean, because I don't know how we could send a letter around. I mean, does it have to be public? And I'm just not sure how do we.
Mindy or Ms. Mesmer?
Just wondering if it would be appropriate at this time to hear a motion for a formal vote on the commission's input into the process and sort of lay out what we might think should be in the outlines, just in general concept, and then have a formal vote to provide more backup to the powers that be that we need to be able to act in this time.
Okay, do we want to wrap that all into one, or do we want to have one? So let's do the easier one first. So let's propose that we draft a letter of input into the committee on August 5th, and let's have 3 bullets that we're going to put in it, our 3 top bullets. And then we can charge some with writing that as long as we have the 3 bullets. Does that sound reasonable? Anyone contest that idea? Okay, so now we're open to 3 bullets for the letter for the hearing on August 5th. Representative Baum.
My hand, because like to know why. The Education Commission has been meeting quite regularly. So why, what's the problem of us meeting or not meeting? I mean, it seems to be politics there or something, because if another commission can meet quite regularly, why aren't we prevented from meeting?
Well, we have to be granted that status of exigency that the Education Commission is, because the issue is that if we were to meet, if we were to meet, then they have to explain to the 50 or 100 other committees and commissions why they can't meet, and that's the reason they're holding back the floodgates. So we have to get ourselves a special status equal to that of the Education Commission.
If I might.
Who is this? Senator Chanley?
I'd happily, so I know you sort of have a motion on the floor here that you want to discuss, and but just I will respond to the Representative Bohm's comment. I think we can work to speak to folks. I don't know that that needs to be a formal action. I think that we can speak to folks and make clear that this is an exigent circumstance, and I'm perfectly happy to work to do that in as quick a way as possible. And so I just wanted to make that comment, and then I know there is I think motion before us. So
well, we're trying to put together the motion. We need 3 bullets for our motion, for 3 bullets that we are going to communicate to the hearing. So I need people who want to put in a bullet. Ms. Harrington. We need to unmute.
Thank you. I suppose we have to come to a decision as a commission, because the actual meeting is related to extending the air permit. Is that correct? Because if that's accurate, then we as a commission have to come to a decision. Where do we fall on that? Are we for the extension or against the extension? That has to be, or are we saying these things need to be considered in determining what the extension is? That has to be a decision this commission makes. If we're going to say anything about what the purpose of the hearing is about.
I think that what I was suggesting is that we have 3 bullets of things we want to be considered.
Okay.
As part of that decision.
I see. Without taking a stance.
I don't think it's necessary to take a stance.
Okay,
so we are taking a stance by the bullets we provide.
Okay, gotcha.
So does someone have bullets? I know that we discussed a number of things that people considered crucial as we're going through. I believe Representative Thomas had one, and Representative Mesmer, or I mean Ms. Mesmer.
I just wanted to present some information. I just heard that the HB 1264 is on its way to the governor right now. So that may impact the overall schedule for what's happening, but I do think that it provides support for us to, come out with some sort of decision or stance from this commission.
Okay, I'm kind of getting the sense that we are not ready to move forward, and that we don't have the information or the wherewithal to provide input as a commission. So I'm tending toward each person who wants to provide input to do so on their own, unless we have, and the people who have their hands up, are your hands still up, or are you? So I'm gonna lower everyone's hand, and if you have a statement about bullets or getting information to the commission, and you feel that we need to do it as a commission rather than individually, please raise your hand now. Okay, Ms. Mesmer.
So I actually think that my opinion is that I would support, I do not support an extension on their air emissions controls. They have been here for decades, polluting the Merrimack area with their air emissions knowingly. They came here from Vermont with the understanding that they would not have to put air emissions controls on their plant when they came to New Hampshire. I think they knowingly continue to pollute. They know that the state has developed state science-based standards for what is safe for people in New Hampshire to ingest in their water systems. And I think that the technology has existed for decades that will remove these PFAS compounds to a level proven by the state of North Carolina, where the Gen X plant is polluting there as well, that it's effective in removing these compounds. And I think that we as a commission, I would definitely support a letter or some sort of position from this commission that it opposes any extension on that permit.
Okay, Representative Murphy. You need to unmute. Representative Murphy, you need to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I wholeheartedly agree with Ms. Mesmer. Many of us in Merrimack testified at our town hearing against the extensions of St. Gobain's permits, and the one that they did not show up at. I was certainly hoping that, given the concerns of this commission, that we would be in opposition to an extension and willing to say so. And I think that the pillars that were, I don't have the actual slide, but I think that would provide a good foundation for a response to, for our rationale as to why we would not be supportive of an extension to continue the contamination of our community. So.
Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by the pillars.
I think she means the decisions that were made, for the pillars that were listed in the first presentation we saw this morning.
The criteria
Decision.
used by, yeah.
Okay. So what you're recommending then is that we take those points from the first presentation and put those into a letter. And okay, so state your motion then, either Senator Chanley or Representative Murphy. Would you please state this as a motion? And I realize that some people will not be voting on this, that NHDES cannot vote on this.
Can I say, this is Shannon Chandley. I would like to just say, and if Representative Murphy wants to put that forward as a motion, I think that's worthy of consideration. But I also think that we need, I'm so hesitant to vote on something before I've actually seen what it says. So if Representative Murphy wants to put forward that we draft a letter that incorporates those pillars, and we draft a letter that incorporates our response to the pillars that were described, and we can then, sign on as members of the commission. That makes sense to me. I don't know if others agree with that. I really would like us to have something in place. I think Senator Deitch, as you indicated, we really seem not to be in the place where we've got a concrete proposal before us. I fully appreciate the desire to move forward with that, but I don't think we're there right now.
And I would prefer that people act as individuals, honestly. And we have commission members, obviously, who cannot take a position on this because of their roles in the government.
And forgive me, I don't want to interrupt you, but I also again, want to make sure we're acting within our charge.
Mhm. Yeah, well, we do have a charge to make recommendations, but we're not there yet. We definitely are not there yet. And that will come out of the commission eventually. I know, and I would encourage that this could be more of a petition kind of thing, and that people could sign on as I am a member of the commission. And I think that, carries some weight as opposed to the commission itself doing it. Would that be acceptable, Representative Murphy? Or do you want to if you want to make a motion to do this, please, we can consider it.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I would like, I think, to make a motion to draft a letter stating an opposition to the extension of the variance for August 5th. And I'm not sure what else we need. I understand that some members can't participate because of their roles, but I would think, given our roles and responsibilities that we just reviewed, I think this is the place for us to be making a statement. I think this should be an expectation of ours, and I'm not sure whether we all agree that would be appropriate, but I think maybe that's what we need to vote on, whether people agree that variance should be given or not, and maybe that has to be the starting point, is whether or not people agree that would be appropriate. So maybe that has to be the first question, and then how we do that, the next question.
So I do want to wrap this up. We have been at this for 2.5 hours. So is your motion that, I've got a bunch of people who want to talk down though. Are you moving that we simply communicate to the hearing via a letter that we oppose the extension?
Yes.
That's okay. So that's a motion. Who wants to discuss that motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Ms. Harrington seconds. And okay. Representative Woods.
Thank you. I agree that we need to have a voice heard. I do have some concerns about putting the entire commission on it, because that may in fact put the members who cannot vote and are in government positions in an awkward position, and conceivably, since it would be, if it is signed as the commission, then it would put them in conceivably an awkward legal position.
Yeah, that's my concern.
I have grave concerns about that. I admit we need to go forward. Secondly, we are entering into an opinion relative to, and I think there may be some legal merit, and it was alluded to, I think Mr. Wamsott, offered that in fact some of the subcontractors may not be able to meet some of the deadlines. Now, admittedly, they've been 4 years at this and they should have had their ducks in line, but that does not preclude the fact that given the exigencies of the current situation, and that would be something for the courts to decide. And I think those contracts have been submitted and I think are going to be reviewed, and someone will have to make a determination as to whether those contracts in fact are smoke and mirrors, or whether they have actual reliable information about a reason that these subcontractors can't meet that deadline. So I think we have to be objective about that part too, even though we are, and I too am very concerned that this is a mechanism just to drag things out. But I'll stop there.
Okay, Representative Thomas.
Yes, I'm afraid Gary just stole my thunder. My concern is that they're claiming, and of course, I'm not for any kind of a delay. You know, I want to put that out front. But they're claiming that COVID impacts their ability to do this. So we need more information about the specific of why COVID impacts this. Is it a supply chain thing? Is it suppliers? Is it? They seem to be fully operational. So I'm not. So I am concerned that this is a delay tactic. But I would need more information to know the specifics.
Yeah. Representative Murphy, did you have something else to say? No? Okay. All right. So we will.
Senator Deach?
Yeah.
It's Shannon again. I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt one. If I could just, everything that Representative Thomas and Representative Woods just said, the things you've said have made sense. Can I make the suggestion, and it may not be received, but I'm going to make the suggestion that that Representative Murphy draft a letter that says something along the lines of we the undersigned members of the commission, and circulate it to, and those who wish to sign on or edit or can, but it not be in fact the official statement of the commission, for the reasons that Representatives Thomas and Woods indicated and you yourself indicated. Again, that may not be okay, because I understand I do not want to see a delay. Everything that was said prior, I agree with, but I recognize the complexities here.
Yes. So, but unless Representative Murphy wants to withdraw her motion, we have a motion on the table. So. You're muted, Representative Murphy.
Sorry. Thank you. I will withdraw the motion.
Do we want to withdraw the second? Okay. All right. So we hope to get a letter from you, and we will move on. So I think at this point, let us, how about letting Senator Chandley and Representatives Murphy and Rung and I try to work with legislative leadership to find out how we can have subcommittee meetings, which is what we need now for the drafts, and committee meetings. And I think that's probably as far as we can get in this meeting. Representative Thomas, did you have something else you wanted to say? Your hand's raised. No, okay. All right. Ms. Forty.
Yes, hi. As I joined the commission a little late, like into the process, I mean, I have been to one of the health subcommittee meetings, but I don't know that I was officially assigned to a specific subcommittee. I would like to go wherever there's need, in any way that I can be helpful.
Okay. Would you prefer environment or health? I think we have more people on the health than we do on the environment. If you would like to be on the environmental committee.
Sure, that would be fine.
Okay, I will assign you. And Dr. Bush, did you want to be on the policy committee? You can let me know later.
I think at this time, though, I'm committed to the health committee, and then we'll talk about others. But certainly we'll stay in touch with Mike Wimsatt.
Okay, good.
At the department level.
Very good. So I believe then, if that is acceptable to everyone proceeding in that fashion, that will wrap up the meeting, and we will take a vote to adjourn to indefinite future meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Would you call the roll, please? You're muted.
Before I call the roll, Representative Nodder, I know you joined late after we took attendance. Could you confirm where you are and that you are alone in attending this meeting?
I'm at home. My son is here, and so is my noisy bird.
Okay. All right. Okay, Mr. Ayotte, this is the motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bandazian,
Yes.
Representative Bohm,
Yes.
Senator Chandley,
Yes.
Ms. Costello is absent. Dr. Bush,
Yes.
Ms. DeVries, I believe she had to leave. Senator Deitch,
Yes.
Ms. Fortley,
40. Yes.
I'm sorry. Ms. Harrington,
Yes.
Ms. Mesmer,
Yes.
Representative Murphy,
Yes.
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Ms. Paradis. Ms. Paradis?
She left.
Oh, okay. The clerk votes yes. Representative Thomas,
Yes.
Representative Woods,
Yes.
Mr. Wimsat. He probably left. Okay, well, the motion passes.
Well, he's still here, but
Oh.
we thank you all. We thank you all. Gonna unmute him, but thank you all for your time, and we will let you know the outcomes of our work with the legislative leadership and attempts to schedule.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay well.
Thank you. Bye.